Been a while since I've had a guest on the program. I'd say we're about due. Rachel James will be drifting on through the old podcast today. My name's Mischke. We're going to talk about violence. No way around it. Not when you're talking about the axe.
A heinous southern Minnesota crime from 1988 is once again making headlines. Some of you may recall the name David Brom. At 16 years old, he murdered his parents and two of his siblings with an axe in the middle of the night in their Rochester home. Now the 53-year-old is set to be released from prison.
How is he getting out?
When David Brom was convicted of first-degree murder, he was sentenced to 3 consecutive life terms. One of the first deputies who responded that night is Kevin Torgerson.
We, as the public, must trust the parole board's decision, but it is still hard for me to accept and forget the sights and smells of what I saw that Thursday evening in 1988.
I just read a book called Whack Job, A History of Axe Murder. The author is a woman from Lawrence, Kansas, Rachel McCarthy James. Her dad is the great Bill James, the American baseball writer, baseball historian, baseball statistician. Rachel inherited her dad's writing gifts. She even wrote a book with him at one point. But Whack Job is the one I want to talk about. A bloody examination of the axe's foundational role in human history, from prehistoric violence to war and executions to newspaper headlines and popular culture. For as long as the axe has been in our hands, we have used it to kill. Much like the wheel and the boat and the telephone, the axe is a transformative piece of technology. It's been with us since prehistory. And just as early humans used the axe to chop down trees or hunt for food, they also used it to murder. Rachel James delivers a critical examination of acts of violence. Whack Job! A history of axe murder. Welcome to the show, Rachel James. Happy to have you here.
Thanks so much for having me, Tommy.
I want to start out by mentioning that your book got me to look into a question I hadn't looked into before. There is a business on the very street that I'm on here. Been around forever, a well-known business, and the logo is an executioner with a hood on holding an axe. And the business is called Axe Man.
I've never heard of that before. I've got to look that up.
This could very well be the official store of your book. The guy has an axe and looks like he's getting ready to chop someone's head off. Because of your book, I researched it, and the store was actually originally named The Man with the Axe. And the name was later shortened to the current Axe Man. I don't know if the Man with the Axe also came with that logo. It's a disturbing logo because it looks sort of like something that comes with a Happy Meal, an executioner toy. The store was originally named The Man with the Axe as a way to get people to remember they cut prices, slash prices there. So everything's cheap. I never bothered to look into this before, and yet wouldn't driving by it for years cause one to ask, wait a minute, why would they ever have a name like that? But I'm glad I did.
One of the things I learned with this book for sure is that the axe is often taken for granted. It's kind of below notice. It's something that's just part of the fabric of everyday life. And even when it's used in a threatening manner like this, we don't really always take it that seriously.
The second thing I wanted to bring up, somewhat unrelated, was Lawrence, Kansas. Is that where you are right now?
Yes. Yep. Born and raised.
Born and raised. That's all I need to know to get a sense of your personality.
Weird little town in the Midwest, college town.
Have you been to the Museum of the Odd?
I have not actually. I think that got started while I was away in college. So I have not been there, but I need to go.
I spent a year in Lawrence. My wife was at the university there
Oh,
pursuing
yeah.
her doctorate, and so I had to spend a year hanging out there, which turned out not to be a sentence at all. It was a lovely town. I knew nothing about it when I got down there, but I had a wonderful year there, both there and 25 miles away in Kansas City. But
Mhm.
Lawrence in particular, I did fall in love with for its quirkiness, its weirdness. My favorite place was a joint named after an abolitionist.
John Brown Underground is what you might be thinking
That's
of. Yeah,
it.
it's a really neat little kind of a speakeasy bar.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a really fun place.
I liked that joint, and then there was another bar I liked. I think it was called the Bourgeois Pig.
Yes, Bourgeois Pig is a great bar. Yeah, that's a fun place. That really gives a sense of Lawrence's quirky approach to authority and everything.
But there was a guy there who turned his house into the Museum of the Odd. It was one of those houses where I went in, and it was very dark in there, and the guy was all alone, and we were all alone, and there was just a sense of, are we getting out of here? He was about 6'5", had all his shades drawn and the blinds. I didn't know what was going on. We were in his house, and everything we were looking at was weirder than the next thing, shrunken heads, stuff like that. But
Oh, wow.
that's good old Lawrence.
It sounds like he's channeling William Burroughs, who lived here for the
Yeah.
last part of it.
I would have loved to have gone to William Burroughs' house on Halloween. I
Yes.
hear that was a fun thing to do.
Yeah.
I would love to know more about how Lawrence developed. Is it just the university that it came to be considered so quirky? Because there are a lot of university towns.
I think it has to do with the fact that it's between Topeka and Kansas City. We got a lot of people who don't quite want the relative big city feel of Kansas City and like to live at a little bit slower pace, get a lot of culture from there. KU has really had a great dance program, theater program, music. And another thing that really kept Lawrence weird is that in the 80s, when everyone was building malls, we really resisted malls. We really wanted to keep our Massachusetts Street, Mass Street, which is where John Brown Underground and the Bourgeois Pig both are. We really wanted to keep the culture of that downtown street intact. And I think that has really paid off.
There was a fella who used to wander Massachusetts. He seemed to be almost a well-known local character, sort of protected by the town. And
Dennis?
yes, Dennis, the
Yeah,
guy with
Dennis
the
is still
shopping
around,
cart
yeah.
and the mannequin.
Yep, his mannequins. Yeah, you find him sometimes. A couple of times I live right here downtown. A couple of times I've taken a walk and just found a mannequin in the bushes. And I'm like, all right, well, Dennis will be coming back for that at some point.
That's great. People have asked you this endlessly and forever, but I'm going to start here. You could have written about a lot of different things. I'm sure you could have come up with a slew of different ideas for a book, a way to spend your time. It takes a long time to write a book. You picked The Axe, and it's a little bit tricky because the book is titled A History of Axe Murder, but really what you are is writing a book just devoted to the axe in general in so many different ways. Did you all of a sudden come upon an axe in your basement one day, or did your grandpa bequeath you an axe?
My first book was called The Man from the Train. I wrote it with my dad, Bill James, who's best known as a baseball writer. And he has always been kind of a true crime fan. And he got really, after he wrote his first true crime book, he got interested in the Valeska axe murders, which was a family of, I think, 6 and then 2 neighboring girls who were killed in the middle of the night. Terrible event, June 1912. And he basically hired me as a research assistant to try and find, sorry, there's a train coming through. I hope that's okay to edit.
Oh, the good old trains of Lawrence. I used to lie in bed and listen to them. I would tell my wife it's like listening to whales.
Oh, it's so soothing. But that brings me back to my first book that I was talking about,
Yeah.
The Man from the Train, which was about, so my dad asked me to come on as a research assistant to work on this axe murder case. He thought there were a number of associated cases with it, and he thought that there were more that hadn't been found yet. So I kind of solved this 100-year-old axe murder mystery. So that was my first book. And while I was promoting that book, I was thinking, I was talking a lot about axe murderers, thinking a lot about it. I started to wonder, why do we still talk about axe murderers this way? Why is it with kind of often a comic tone, kind of like the Axeman that we were discussing earlier? How did it get that association? We don't have things, we don't say gun killer or knife slayer or things like that. So I started thinking about the role of the axe murderer in culture and society. And then I started thinking about, has anybody written a book about the history of the axe? I very much tried to look at it through the lens of the axe as used in violence, because it's used in so many different ways as a weapon. You know, we've got battle axes, executioner's axes. It's a huge tool of state power and state violence. And then it's also got this human level where it's a very handy, commonplace tool for interpersonal violence. And it's often reached for in that way. And I thought it was interesting to track that as a common weapon through to today, where it, because of The Shining and movies like So I Married an Axe Murderer, it's kind of become this joke. And I thought that that was just a fascinating arc to trace throughout history.
I've spent a fair amount of time since finishing your book thinking about why the axe if you wanted to murder someone. And you spoke at one point about how today you could just get yourself a gun and take care of a murder a lot easier with a gun. You almost spoke in terms of the days of the axe being the weapon of choice and a murder having come and gone.
Almost all of its applications have been supplanted by other things. Chainsaws, you know, we don't butcher chickens in our backyards most of the time anymore. There's a lot of different ways that we process lumber differently. Whereas for a long time, it was something that you would just have one or two of in the house, in the workyard or whatever, in the barn. It would just always be at hand. And, you know, even though my first book was about an axe murderer who really fetishized the axe, it was a big part of his ritual. For most murderers, that's not the story. For most murderers, it's more like Raskolnikov is fictional, but in Crime and Punishment, the reason that he chooses an axe is because there just happens to be one in the kitchen and he thinks nothing could have been simpler. So it's really a weapon of convenience, and it's just not at hand anymore. A lot more houses have guns than they do axes.
What I was going to say about it as something that could still be used, I haven't murdered anybody in my life yet, but I don't know that it would be great for me to get a gun. I'm not real handy with guns. I don't know offhand if I got one that I'd be any good with it. I always think of John Wayne in The Shootist saying, you know, anybody can fire a weapon, but when you're pointing at a person, you hesitate and it's over. So the question is, are you willing? And he says to Ron Howard, I was always willing. And I think about that, and I think, well, I don't know how willing I'd be.
Yeah.
But now an axe. Let's go to an axe. Well, first of all, I know where I could get one. I have one. So I have an axe. That's handy right there. Second of all, I like it better than a knife, because a knife, you're going to be right against the person. And unless you have a stab that kills them right away, you're going to be in a wrestling match. I don't have faith in me winning that one. So I like the distance the axe gives, the fact that I could be back a little bit from the person. I like the idea that one blow I could get the person down, maybe a second blow finish them off. Now, again, I'm not planning a murder, but there are a lot of reasons why the axe could still be preferable in 1965, 1972, 1984. We still have the axe murders in these years. There still are axe murders. So people must be finding them appealing. Do you have anything to say about that?
A lot of people, when I've been doing interviews, have talked about the brutality, the up closeness of the axe. But there is a little bit of distance.
A little
and I
distance.
Like you're mentioning that.
Yes.
There is, compared to like having to stab someone a bunch of times. Also, thinking about the knife versus the axe for murder purposes, the axe really provides a lot of leverage because of the handle. It's not just distance, but it's additional force that you don't have to supply yourself. If you're using a knife, you've basically got to supply all of the force. And that's got to be a lot of force to puncture somebody's chest or head or whatever. Whereas with an axe, because the axe head itself is so heavy, there's less force needed. But I would say 2 whacks generally will not do it.
The fact that you know that worries me. How many did you end up needing?
The man from the train, you could do it with just basically 1 whack. He used the back of the axe. And he was a lumberjack, so he was very practiced with it.
He was a lumberjack.
Yeah, he was. He was an itinerant. He did a lot of different labor, but lumberjack was one of them. Whereas if you look at someone like Betty and Candy, which is a more recent one, 1980s Housewives, there have been a couple of series made about it. She was a small woman and it was a huge axe, which is hard to wield. It was 40 whacks that she gave her, which is way more than whoever killed Lizzie Borden's parents gave Andrew and Abby Borden. It was actually only 18 with one and 10 with the other, not the 40. You do have to go a few times to really get it. It wouldn't just be one or two whacks. You do need a little bit more force than that if you're doing it for the first time, I would say.
It would be the first time for me. I just want to reiterate. I don't like the multiple swings because it is brutal what some of these people look like in this book of yours. I mean, they're missing faces, they're missing eyes. I don't like the images in my head, and I would be one of these guys where after the first swing, if there was any distortion to their appearance, I'd say, well, I got to get out of here. I'm a little squeamish. Can you finish yourself off with poison?
I think you are self-diagnosing why you would not be a murderer in the first place, first of all. But going back to your point about that, that's also why it's a handy tool for executions. Of course, executions are different because in most cases, the person who is executed is consenting to it by holding their head still so you can get a good shot at their neck. And as long as you've got a practiced hand and a sharp axe, that's going to be a pretty quick way to die, as I talked about in the chapter about King Henry VIII, because he killed so many people with his executions.
Take a deep breath, knowing your loved one is at the Welshire Memory Care Center. They're there right now, standing in the sunlit common area. Their day has started gently, the aroma of fresh coffee, a chef-prepared breakfast. They're engaged. They're checking out the art studio. Their hands are busy, their mind focused. Maybe they're moving with purpose in a light-guided exercise class, tailored just for them, just for their stage of memory care. The Welshire breaks down memory care into 4 stages. That specialization works to the advantage of your loved one. In the afternoon, they gather with friends, listening to music, enjoying the comforting rhythm of engagement. You're at home, and they're okay, and that makes all the difference. The Welshire Memory Care Center of Bloomington and Medina. Is your blood pressure officially higher than your stock portfolio? Are you having stress dreams where your 401k turns into a soggy waffle? Listen, the financial world is a garbage fire. Everyone's advice is either buy gold or just follow a sketchy influencer who rents a Lamborghini. You need an advisor who remembers a time when a spreadsheet meant actual paper. You need Josh Arnold. Josh has been crushing the investment game for over 4 decades. He has no time for nonsense. That's why he offers a free, specific consultation for 48 minutes on the phone. He calmly will show you how to make your life better. 952-925-5608.
Investment services offered by Josh Arnold Investment Consultant, LLC, a security and investment advisor. Past performance is no guarantee of future results. All investments involve risk. Tommy Mischke is a paid endorser.
In March, Johan DeWitt accepted a plea bargain in the vicious killing of a 40-year-old woman, Julie Minogue. Today, he was sentenced to 40 years in prison.
During that hearing, DeWitt lost control of himself. News 8 investigative reporter Jeff Dedarian was in the courtroom for that. Jeff.
The killer flew into a rage.
Police say in December of 2022, DeWitt killed his ex-girlfriend, hitting her with an axe 13 times.
Flew into a rage.
DeWitt given 40 years today.
6 marshals standing guard, and then, with no warning, the killer flew into a rage.
Well, it is the oldest cold case in Iowa, and the details are a little disturbing. 6 children and 2 adults were killed with an axe, and the killer has never been found. Today, the house is one of the most popular haunted house landmarks in the country. It is really haunted, really haunted, really haunted.
It was one of the most horrific crimes that they had ever seen in the Rochester, New York area, said District Attorney Sandra Dorley. On February 19, 1982, Kathy Krausnick was found murdered in bed with an axe lodged in her head.
This is the axe that was found in Kathy's head.
Kathy's husband quickly became the prime suspect in his wife's murder.
So you're saying that this man, who had never shown any sign of violence before and never shows any violence after, snaps one night in his life and puts an axe in his wife's head?
Yep. Yeah.
Just doesn't look like an axe murder.
No, but Ted Bundy didn't look like a serial killer.
King Henry VIII. When I got to that part of the book, I had forgotten what a murdering madman that guy was. Do we have a number on how many heads he had removed?
I've heard as many as like 60,000. It's definitely in the tens of thousands of people.
I thought you were going to say 80.
Oh, no. Thousands and thousands and thousands of people he had executed. And the axe was the good way to go in that situation because some people were drawn and quartered. And that is an awful situation. No, an axe in King Henry VIII's day, I mean, you didn't want to be executed, but by the axe was the best way. You had the best chance of being executed cleanly and not tortured with multiple chops to the neck. And it also had kind of a dignity to it. It's a really time-honored practice. People have been executing through axes thousands and thousands of years. And a lot of, stately people have been killed like that. Queens and kings in some cases. A big part of how they looked at it was that death was so much a part of their daily lives, not just with executions, but also with the Black Plague. People really thought about how they wanted to die and whether or not they wanted a good death. And the axe was one of the better ways to do it.
There is a passage, you were mentioning people being drawn and quartered. First, the condemned was tortured and starved. Then on the day of, they were dragged by a horse to the site. The condemned man was first hung using the short drop method. The long drop method is the modern method of hanging, which is the quick death. The short drop, the body has to writhe for a bit, and the struggle is what tightens the noose. But in drawing and quartering, they didn't finish the process, so the condemned would be alive while they cut off the genitals and threw them in a fire. Sometimes they finished the job there by opening up his stomach and throwing his entrails into the same fire, then the heart, then the body chopped into quarters. Sometimes the quartering process was performed by horses, each limb tied to a different beast headed in a different direction. Then finally the victim was beheaded and the dismembered parts of their body presented to the king. Now, this is why you would be so grateful to learn that they were just going to chop your head off. This is why you would happily lay your head on the chopping block saying, thank you, thank you, thank you. Until you read about the options, you don't understand why people were so giddy. And in fact, they were so giddy sometimes to be getting their head chopped off that they're really in a relaxed mood and kind of making jokes and having nice conversation. I'm struck by the people you talk about who just feel real comfortable. They feel like they won the lottery. They're just getting their head chopped off, and they're joking, asking how the kids are of the guy with the axe. And
the Henry VIII's court was really high pressure. Everyone was constantly on edge because his moods were always changing. It was a really high tension, really make your stomach churn with all of the anxiety that it would give you. And when you're getting executed, that's over. You don't have to worry about it anymore. I think it was Thomas Cromwell who said somebody was asking him something about some papers, and he was like, look, give me a half an hour and that's not my problem anymore. So I think there was a sense of release. And also with some of the queens, Anne Boleyn and Catherine Howard, who were both executed, though Anne was executed with a sword because a sword is much classier than an axe. And that was kind of the last thing that Henry VIII did for her. But both of them were able to kind of relieve their anxiety by focusing on their outfit and how they would present themselves. But then also, the last woman I talk about was Margaret Pole, who was a noblewoman in her own right, Henry VIII's cousin, who was unprepared for the chopping block, who did not have time to prepare herself, to make herself look nice, to think about her last words. And she had a really horrible death, was hacked by a young man who did not have any experience at all. So yes, the axe was the good option, but there were a lot of ways that could go awry as well.
The usual guy You write the usual guy, and you want the usual guy. Believe me, a seasoned pro had been sent north to deal with the executions of certain of the northern rebels up that way. So this poor woman got a trembling child, a wretched and blundering youth. Maybe he'd been the best woodsman in the king's court, but he was untrained to deal with the reality of ending a human life. And so this was a disaster. Swing after swing after swing. She's not dying, or she's dying but not dead.
Having a good death was very important to people, and you really wanted the clean cut for sure. That's why part of the ritual was forgiving the Axeman and giving him a payment so that he would do a good job, basically.
One of Henry VIII's wives, she actually had them bring down the chopping block to her cell so she could, the night before, kind of practice putting her head on it, just making sure she could do it in a way that she would look the best, maybe her best side, maybe make it look more dignified, and I think it would look good if I put my head this way.
Yeah, Catherine Howard, that's a really sad one. I mean, Anne Boleyn, not that she deserved her death either, but she, she knew what she was doing. She knew the game she was playing. Catherine Howard was just a teenager who didn't really have any choice but to marry this old, gross man.
This book you wrote with your dad, The Man from the Train, you were researching an axe murder, multiple murders, 8 people killed, and you were trying to figure out who it was. I find it extraordinary that you guys thought you could figure it out. I mean, you're not detectives. You're not in law enforcement. This was over 100 years ago. What made you think there's a sort of audacity to that? What made you think you could figure out who killed these 8 people?
I don't think either of us really thought it would happen. What we did think is that we would find more associated crimes. There were a number of other crimes around the same time with the same method and the same kind of ritualistic elements, the back of the axe being used, the kind of family that was targeted, the way that the victims' bodies were treated after death, the fact that the house was locked up afterwards. So there were a number of ritualistic things that we could look at and say, okay, there's a lot of commonalities between this crime in Oregon in, 3 months later, this crime in Colorado Springs a month later, things like that. So I started looking back further and further, and pretty quickly I started finding cases that looked a lot like this. When we started looking at it, became clear that there was a narrative here. And then it was just dumb luck that I happened to go back far enough to find a crime that was well written about, followed in the newspapers, that had all these elements and also put one man at the scene of the crime pretty firmly. We go into great detail about it in the book. I'm sure it sounds unbelievable, but you can read The Man from the Train and see what you think of our evidence yourself.
Well, and I know that many people have found your work credible. I don't think there's another theory out there that has as much credibility. I just find it both harrowing and fascinating that a lumberjack was traveling the United States town to town on freight cars with his axe, taking out large numbers of people before going back to the train station and getting on another freight train, some boxcar, heading to the next town. And I believe he's the second most prolific serial killer in history.
He was definitely very prolific. I often see people will say, it was so easy to kill people back then. You just do it and you get out of town. And that is true to a certain extent. But that's, serial killers are not very common, especially back then before they were kind of a pop culture thing. When you kill someone, it's usually not just for the pleasure of killing them, as with The Man from the Train. Usually you have a reason, and people are going to figure out your reason pretty soon.
It's really clear reading your book why in a small town, when a bunch of people were found dead in the morning, people wouldn't think that some lumberjack came through town last night on a boxcar. There wasn't a history of that sort of thing. Serial killers weren't a thing. They right away figured someone in this town did it, someone who hated these guys, who hates these guys. So that's why this guy was able to get away with it for so many years. It just never entered people's minds that people operated that way.
And they couldn't find him. They couldn't catch him. He was never caught. We end the book by talking about a crime in Germany which has some similarities to it. So we
Okay.
think maybe he went back to Germany. That's when World War I was. Maybe he repatriated, something like that. But, I think it's just as likely that he was creeping onto somebody's farm one night and he got caught in the act when he was about to start his work and somebody shot him and killed him.
Listen to that sound. It's the sound of your community, where you know your neighbors. Now think about your bank. If your money is sitting in a massive national institution, you're a number, pal. A quarterly earnings report. This is the advantage of North American Banking Company. They offer something the national giants cannot: local decision-making. You need a commercial loan, a mortgage? You talk to the person who lives here, who understands the local market, and who can make a decision without waiting for an approval from 3 states away. North American Banking Company offers the same technology the big banks do, but with human scale service. When you visit one of their 6 Twin Cities locations, you see familiar faces. They know you. It's time to shift your money from a bank that sees you as data to a bank that sees you as a vital part of this community. Stop being a number. Start being a neighbor.
North American Banking Company. Member FDIC, Equal Housing Lender.
You know that feeling when the road opens up, when the city lights drop away, and it's just you and the horizon and the engine humming beneath that hood? That feeling isn't about transportation. It's about quiet movement. It's the grace of the road. For over 60 years, since 1963, Fury Motors has been the essential engine of graceful movement in the Twin Cities. They don't sell cars. They offer the freedom of movement in comfort and style on the open road. They are the bedrock of reliable travel, built across generations, and that legacy of Fury Motors is waiting for you in every corner of the metro. Find your GMC or your Buick in Forest Lake. Visit their Dodge, Jeep, and Chrysler dealership in Stillwater and South St. Paul. You find your Ford in Waconia. 4 locations, 6 decades of uncompromising trust, 1 single mission: to provide the right machine for your next chapter. Trust, the institution that has been defining mobility in Minnesota since 1963. Fury Motors. It's not a dealership. It's a movement, people. It's a movement. I want to go to a case you mentioned earlier. Betty and Candy. We have a very strange case here. I had never heard of it. So you say there's been a couple of TV shows or made-for-television movies on this?
3, actually.
3 of them. I missed them all. I didn't know about this. It's quite astounding to me, this story. Can you give people kind of a general idea of who Betty and Candy were?
Absolutely. Oh, it's a fascinating case. I really get why there have been so many television adaptations of this crime. Betty and Candy knew each other through church. Betty was less popular. Candy was very vivacious, social butterfly. And Candy decides that she wants to have an affair, and she decides that she's going to have this affair with Betty's husband. So Candy and Alan have this affair while Betty is pregnant, and it eventually ends, and they just continue on like nothing had happened. They go on, their daughters became best friends, so they were having sleepovers at each other's houses all the time. And one day, Candy goes over to Betty's house to pick up her daughter's swimsuit. And at some point during this, they come to a confrontation about Candy's affair. Apparently, Betty grabbed the axe from the utility room, big axe, not a hatchet, and threatens her with it. They get into a confrontation, and it ends up that Candy hits her, I think it was 41 times with the axe, completely obliterates her, and is later tried and is able to get away with it basically on an insanity defense, in which she says that she couldn't control herself because Betty shushed her in the middle of this confrontation, and that made her flash back to when her mom shushed her in an emergency room when she was 4, which is absolutely nuts. It's a wild story. There was a TV movie about it in 1990. And then like a month after I sell my book, 2 different series get announced one starring Jessica Biel and the other starring Elizabeth Olsen about this case. So it's a wild case. I definitely see why it's so ripe for adaptation.
These are a couple of suburban church women. I don't picture either of them going for an axe. What year are we talking?
1980. It was actually just after The Shining came out.
Just after The Shining. Maybe that's related. But
I don't think it was even in theaters yet.
Oh, okay.
But Friday the 13th came out right around that time, too. I think that Betty wanted to scare Candy off, so she grabbed a big, huge axe to scare her off. And then it ended up being turned against her. And it's crazy because, Candy was a small person. She was, I think like 5'3" or something like that, very petite. And she had never held an axe before. In most cases where someone who is small wants to kill someone with an axe, they'll use a hatchet. A hatchet is pretty handy. It's a smaller version of an axe. It's pretty handy. It's easy to use with one hand. Whereas with a 2-handed tree felling axe, you've got a really good chance of chopping off your own toes there rather than hitting the target. But it really shows how rage can overtake you and lead you to completely obliterating someone that I don't think she intended to kill. I don't think that she went over there intending to kill this woman.
Not went over, but at 41 hits with the axe, she wanted to finish her off there, it seemed. But 41 from the petite woman to the heavy-set larger woman kills the larger woman. The larger woman was the one whose husband had an affair with Candy. Candy tries to get away with it for a while. It doesn't come out right away.
They think, oh, this is an axe murderer. They think this is some crazy guy.
This is the traveling lumberjack.
Exactly. They really did think it was some kind of maniac. An axe was a very uncommon weapon. It's still in use sometimes, but not usually in a domestic situation. So I think it was very confounding, especially because, you always think it's going to be the husband, but the husband, Alan, was away. He was out of state. I think he was actually in Minnesota.
He was in good old St. Paul.
He was.
He was actually in St. Paul when this happened. So he was able to skate because the first thing they think of is the husband. And they're in Texas. They're in Texas.
They're in Texas. Yeah, it's right outside Dallas.
I would have maybe seen a way for her to get out of this, to be acquitted, if she right away went to the authorities and said, oh my God, I'm a good church-going woman, just some suburbanite, petite little woman. I've never swung an axe in my life. Things got out of hand today, officer. I killed this lady. But she tries to get away with it.
Yeah. So, of course, she paints herself as just trying to act in self-defense, but it's really hard to know what actually went down.
For the record, the thing that would have normally gotten a jury to say, yeah, at 41 swings, sorry, you wanted her dead and you got to do some time. She brought in a psychiatrist. I just snapped because at one point Betty said to me, shush.
Yes.
And doggone it, that reminded me of my childhood.
It was kind of a window when insanity defenses were getting a lot of traction. It's interesting because she got the insanity defense, but she also didn't have to go to an insane asylum or anything like that, which is crazy. I don't think even 5 years later, I don't think she would have gotten away with it because people got sick of it after the Twinkie defense, in which somebody said, it wasn't my fault that I did this because I ate too many Twinkies and it altered my brain chemistry.
So she skates completely on this thing, moves to Georgia and becomes a therapist, family counselor.
No kidding.
Do you know if she's still alive?
I do not know. I knew she was when I wrote it. She changed her name.
Yeah.
She'd be in her 70s now, so hard to say if she's still alive or not.
There was a reference periodically in your book to the true crime boom, that genre. How many people out there enjoy taking in true crime podcasts, reading true crime books. And there was a sentence in your book I wanted to ask you about, and this was when you were writing about Candy and Betty.
Mm-hmm.
The recent true crime boom, driven by women, came for this story of Candy and Betty right about the same time you did. The line, driven by women, threw me. I just found myself first being unaware of that, secondly saying, Well, why would that be driven by women?
True crime podcasts, especially like behemoths like My Favorite Murder, are definitely more listened to by women. And there's also a precedent for this going back to the Victorian era, back in the days of yellow journalism and everything. It was women who would pack the courtroom for interesting crimes that they were following, crimes that were heavily covered in the newspapers. Women were going to these trials and packing in to see this firsthand. But I do think that men have a lot of war stories that they are interested in, whereas true crime, I mean, I think a big part of it is that women are more vulnerable. They're more likely to be the recipient of violence, random violence. And I think it's partially about responding to that fear and kind of self-soothing that fear so that you know, okay, this is what they did wrong to get to this point, and I'm going to avoid that. But it's also just that we are interested in crime. We're interested in this transgression of violence and how conflict gets to that point. I think that that's a very natural human instinct going back really centuries. You know, you look at a lot of old historical documents in things like the Bible, and a lot of them are true crime stories that have slowly turned into myth over the years. But yeah, definitely true crime has been a very feminized fad, and that's just kind of, you know, the nature of fads. They gain cultural steam and then lose it after a certain amount of time. So yeah, you know, I definitely see more women at my events and things like that, more often talk to women about it. So that's definitely been my experience as well.
With axe murders, this is nasty business. And, you know, some of the passages I've read, it's rough stuff. I found myself intrigued in general by why we're interested in this stuff. I was trying to figure that out too. I don't listen to a lot of true crime podcasts, but it's not because that's a subject I'm not interested in. I just probably don't have time for that. I'd probably enjoy them if I listened. But then I want to ask myself, well, why is it fascinating to me? Why isn't it so disgusting I don't even want to get into that world? It's just creepy and disturbing and sick. Why doesn't that turn me off? And I don't know why it doesn't turn me off. And I find myself thinking, well, is it similar to why I would want to go to a haunted house?
Yeah. Or, you know, slowing down past a car crash. You want to see what happened. You want to see how it happened. You got that instinct to look under the rock and see how gross humanity can be. We're all afraid of death. Death is a great mystery. And I think especially violent death. You were talking about, you can't imagine actually heaving an axe at someone. I think a lot of us are like that. I think a lot of us don't understand how someone can be pushed to do that kind of violence. And we want to figure that out as well. The experience of being a murderer, that's so foreign to us that I think it's part of the curiosity. You want to know what it's like to experience something that you would never yourself do.
Yeah, and maybe there's a part of us that wants to understand our own species. I mean,
Yeah, I
these
think
are our
so.
own kind doing
Yeah.
this.
Violent interpersonal contact is very, very human. It happens to us, obviously, since before we even became Homo sapiens. We've got this urge to mediate our differences by killing each other sometimes.
I am death.
In the Twin Cities, people talk a lot about legacy, but legacy isn't just an old sign. Legacy is character, and character is what you want when that person shows up at your door. When you call MSP, Minneapolis-St. Paul Plumbing, Heating, and Air, you're calling a company that has been invited into homes in this area since World War I. Think about that. Well over a century of service. They know technical skill is non-negotiable. Their craftspeople are the best trained in this business: heating, plumbing, air. They master everything from complex furnace repair to boilers to advanced plumbing systems. But every single professional at MSP is trained in something deeper as well: connection. When they arrive, there's warmth there. There's comfort. You realize these are my kind of people. They treat my home like it's their home. They understand a home is more than pipes and wires. It's where life happens. Don't call a random technician. Call a century of commitment. Call MSP. Why the heck would you trust your vision to a convenient chain operation? Does convenience deliver clarity? I don't think so. When you buy eyewear elsewhere, your eye exam is separate from your lens creation. Not at Spectacle Shop. Their eye doctors are right there in-house. Spectacle Shop is against mass production, generic offerings. When you get your lenses at Spectacle Shop, they don't send it out. They do it in-house, precise. They have their own lab. There's a reason Spectacle Shop was voted best eyewear shop in Minnesota the last 5 years in a row by readers of the Star Tribune. You get more than an amazing frame selection. You get your complete vision solution. Your vision is never outsourced. Stop settling for factory-made vision. Spectacle Shop. 4 Twin Cities locations.
Lizzie Borden took an axe and gave her mother 40 whacks. When she saw what she had done, she gave her father 41.
You didn't even want to when you started this book, I don't believe. You didn't even want to go down the road of Lizzie Borden because it was too much of a
I was kind of sick
cliche.
of Lizzie Borden. I was like, all right, well, obviously I've got to do Lizzie Borden, but But I was really fascinated by that. That was one of the most fun pieces to write, was going through it and really understanding. I see why people are so fascinated by it, because it's such a puzzle.
August 4th, 1892. The quiet town of Fall River, Massachusetts was shaken by a horrifying crime. Andrew Borden and his wife, Abby, were found brutally murdered with an axe. At first, no one knew who could have done such a thing. But before long, suspicion turned toward Andrew's 32-year-old daughter, Lizzie Borden. She was a Sunday school teacher, unmarried, and came from a wealthy, respected family. Still, her story kept changing, and police couldn't find anyone else who might have had a motive. Lizzie never confessed, but when she went on trial in 1893, the entire country was glued to the case. And when she was eventually found not guilty, the verdict only deepened the mystery. Did Lizzie Borden really kill her father and stepmother? And if not, who did?
There's such a short amount of time between when people saw Andrew Borden for the last time going into his house and when everyone saw him on that couch dead. It's a short window, and there's so many different things that are beguiling about it. Why was her appearance so neat if she just killed people? And what was fascinating to me, and what I didn't realize, is that she was exonerated in large part because the axe did not fit the crime. The axe that the prosecution hung the case upon did not fit the crime. There's really not a good answer for what the weapon was, because it definitely was not the axe that they pointed to at the crime. So it's a really crazy story, and it was really interesting to see where axes were at that point. The title of the story, the title of the chapter is 5 Axes in the Basement, 1 axe on the roof, which just speaks to how many axes there were at that point in American history. There was an explosion in steel tool making, and so people would just buy an axe to fix up a roof or to behead pigeons or whatever, and then they'd forget about it and buy another axe when they need another axe.
After the murder of Lizzie Borden's father and stepmother, after their murder, several axes found in the basement, one on the roof?
Yes, I think there were 2 big wood-cutting axes and then 3 hatchets. A new axe was found abandoned on a rooftop very near the Borden place.
So much like the case of Candy and Betty, where the killer got off, Lizzie Borden got off.
I don't know if Lizzie did it. I'm not convinced either way. I mean, Candy, we know she did it because she tells us her story of why she did it. Lizzie protested her innocence until the end of her life. There's so many unanswered questions there. I do think the likeliest interpretation is that Lizzie did it. 4 people in a house and 2 of them are brutally murdered. The other ones are just not for some reason. Likeliest thing is that happened. I acknowledge that, but for some reason, I still just don't think she did it.
Did Lizzie go on to become a family counselor?
No, she did not. She seemed to enjoy the rest of her life, though. Had a wide social life. She was really involved in animal charities. So, yeah, she enjoyed her freedom.
The book is Whack Job, A History of Axe Murder. Rachel McCarthy James, who also co-authored The Man from the Train. We talked about that book as well. But Whack Job is the book that's just out. Lovely review in the New York Times, which is how I learned of it. So thank you for your time today, Rachel, and best of luck as you continue to promote this work.
Thank you so much, Tommy. It's been fun.
It's called Axeman Surplus. It's located on University Avenue in St. Paul, and this is one of my favorite stores in the entire Twin Cities. It is a very, very unique shopping experience. Imagine a store that embodies the essence of your quirky yet entertaining, slightly offbeat uncle. That is Axeman Surplus. It's a place of chaos, eccentricity, and total sheer fun. I mean, this store is not just a shopping spot, it's an adventure into the bizarre and the unusual. Axeman Surplus, it's really not your typical store.